Hey guys, it's Danny. Welcome to a new episode from our Orchid Care for Beginners series. Today we are continuing my idea of going along the lines of what happens when, and we're going to discuss all about staking flower spikes. Now, this is a topic that I actually get questions year after year. So I think it's going to be fun to talk about why I stake my orchids or why I don't, and the different scenarios that can happen if you don't stake your orchids, because staking is actually quite important for some orchids, maybe more important than you think. So I hope you'll enjoy today's video since it is Phalaenopsis season. But before we start, this video together with this entire series is of course sponsored by rePotme.com, who offers you everything you could possibly need to properly take care of your orchids, including stakes. From potting mixes to pots, fertilizers, accessories, and everything in between. And not only for orchids, but also for cacti and succulents as well. Even though they might not need stakes, you will find a whole bunch of stuff for these houseplants. So I'll link you to their website down below in the description and in the pinned comment. And also I will share with you the products that I personally love the most. And with that said, let us start, shall we? First off, really quick, yes, we're going through some transitions here hair-wise. It's a work in progress. It will become even out with time, but yeah, apparently it's not easy to remove black box dye from hair without damaging it, and I have no damage and I'm so happy. But bear with me, we're going through something now. Anyway, so back to our subject, stakes. You might have noticed that most orchids we purchase come with staked flower spikes. Are they necessary? Why do we use them? Because naturally, these orchids are not staked. There's nobody in nature making sure that the flower spikes are tied to a branch or anything of the sorts. And well, the truth is, the stakes are not necessarily necessary, but they are actually very, very useful for the orchids we grow in cultivation, which are definitely not the same as the ones you might find in the wild. See, in, let's say, the overwhelmingly vast majority of cases in flower shops, what we will find are man-made hybrids and selected hybrids. Selected for what? For flowers. The more abundant the flowers, the bigger the flowers, the more we like them. And abundance and volume is not necessarily always what's good for the orchid. And in many instances, you will discover that orchid species, if you ever see them in nurseries, they do not have as many flowers or as big flowers. They look a little bit more modest, quote unquote, in comparison to these hybrids. And well, that's one of the reasons why orchids in their natural habitat don't really benefit at all from somebody staking their flower spikes. Another thing to consider is how we grow them. Most of us home growers like to keep our orchids potted for ease of maintenance, ease of care, ease of display, you name it. There are so many benefits to keeping orchids potted in our homes that most of us cannot do without. I simply cannot grow orchids mounted in my home conditions. But because we keep them potted, we also tend to keep them rather upright, especially with their stem. Now, naturally, Phalaenopsis orchids would grow attached to a tree, and they would be rather slanted as such. So their flower spikes would also arch down in the same direction, and that weight would be distributed a little bit differently than how it happens now when we pot them upright. The flower spikes usually go in whatever directions they feel like. If you have light from all sorts of places or you move the orchid around, you might have some flower spikes that go in opposite directions, flowers that might turn whatever direction. The weight distribution is a little wonky, let's say. So it's not unheard of. It is actually quite common, even on my channel, to have yourself some broken flower spikes. It's sad, but I've had it happen so many times, it's not even funny. I don't even want to remember. I actually have videos about it. Furthermore, you can wake up one morning with your orchid on the floor. Why not? Because it was just way too top heavy and the weight distribution was wonky. So what happened was it kind of toppled over. These are very common occurrences, they're very frustrating, and in the worst case scenarios, you can even break leaves and stems and roots and all of those things and seriously damage your orchid, not to mention you're just gonna miss out on the flower show. So for this reason, we have invented the flower stakes, which I might call spikes here and there. They're very similar words. Sorry if that happens. I caught myself doing it a few times. I'll try to distinguish between flower spikes and stakes, the wooden stakes. So the stakes have a role in making our orchids pretty, of course, and more manageable, but also in protecting them from the perils of the home jungle, as it were, which they're not really all that adapted to, no matter if they're hybrids. We cannot really invent genes when there aren't any to begin with. So in the end, staking can be an aesthetic choice, but also a safety choice. When is one, when is the other, when is staking unnecessary? Well, let's take my example here. The orchid you kept seeing in front of you is one of my favorites. It is a complex hybrid from the flower shop, and even if it's not in bloom just yet, it has lots of buds. I do have footage with it. And if you look at the flowers, you will see that they are rather tiny. Yes, they're numerous, but rather tiny. So in this particular instance, the quantity of the flowers is really not as much as to weigh down these flower spikes. I already have experience with this orchid, so I know how it behaves, and I know that the flower spikes it creates are strong enough to hold on to all of that weight of the flowers without additional help. So in this instance, I opted not to stake the orchid, which is, by the way, absolutely fine. Orchids don't need to be staked if they don't really need it. And I personally do really like a flower spike to be a little bit arched. It gives a very elegant feel. It's not necessarily natural. Natural would be, I guess, more pendant on the side, but I feel they are a little bit more elegant. Now, this one is the type of hybrid which doesn't arch way too much, but still I think this display is rather pretty, and because I'm in no danger of breaking the flower spikes or dropping the orchid on the floor, I opted not to stake the flower spikes of this orchid, and that is absolutely fine. So let me show you another orchid which doesn't need staking. Introducing the mini Phalaenopsis. Yes, I know what you're gonna say. These are not mini Phalaenopsis. Yes, they are. That's how they will end up in a few years. This looks a little bit more like what you see in the flower shops. Well, yes, this is a young mini Phalaenopsis that I purchased last year. In the end, it is very likely it will end up like one of these two. These are older Phalaenopsis. That is a little besides the point, but I knew some of you will wonder why the size difference. Now, as some of you might know, miniature Phalaenopsis not only are a little bit smaller than the standard Phalaenopsis, but they also have tiny flowers. And yes, throughout their lives, they will become bigger as they mature. However, their flowers will not. They will always stay small, but they will just be produced in bigger numbers, which is how I like them. I love mini phals because they make a whole lot of tiny little flowers, and best of all, they tend to arch and create beautiful cascades without any help. Now, these orchids, because again, they're not very top heavy and the flowers are not heavy at all, I generally do not spike because I really like this quite dramatically arched appearance to them. Would it be okay if I stake them? Absolutely. You can absolutely stake whatever orchid you feel like. If you want the display to be more upright, that is absolutely fine. It's really about what you like. But generally speaking, when it comes to the need for staking, miniature Phalaenopsis don't really need any type of support, any type of staking, because their flowers, even if numerous, they're not heavy. Now you'll have a little bit of variety. You can see this one is quite arched when it comes to the flower spikes, while this one not so much. It's rather growing upright, and they're actually residing in the same place, so it's not a light thing. But because they're very complex hybrids, the species that have been mixed in the background might vary a little bit, and I'll take a wild guess and say that this is more of a Phalaenopsis, true Phalaenopsis type hybrid, while this one might have some former Dorites in its parentage. Now Dorites now is also classified as a Phalaenopsis, but back in the day it was a different species because it was growing differently than other Phalaenopsis. It was more of a litophyte / terrestrial type of orchid, and it wasn't found generally on tree trunks, but rather on the soil level. So it was growing much more upright with its flower spikes and its leaves than other Phalaenopsis. Now that they mushed it all together, you can't really know what's in the parentage, but I would say this is more of a Dorites type of hybrid, hence the flower spikes are a little straighter, and this definitely is a Schilleriana hybrid with some other types of Phalaenopsis hybrids. In the end, really, in the case of miniature Phalaenopsis, I would say it's really up to you if you want to stake them and shape the flower spikes however you feel like. If you don't feel like staking and bothering with such things, I think it's really safe for you not to do so with miniature Phalaenopsis, since they don't really tend to be very top heavy. But now let's look at a Phalaenopsis orchid that I actually did stake, and I think it will become very obvious why I had to stake it. Ta-da! Look at this beauty. Now, this is an orchid I actually staked recently because I was afraid to let it go on. I initially let it unstaked just for this video, just to show you guys what will happen. Hence why the flower spikes are kind of facing whatever way, but recently I had to stake it. Let me unstake it really quick and show you what the problem is. So first I'm gonna unstake this flower spike. Hopefully I'm not gonna break anything. I will let the stake be, and now I'll unstake this one. I need to lift it. Don't break, don't break, don't break, don't break. This is how incredibly heavy all of these flowers are. And I think you're starting to see the problem here. This orchid is in danger of actually breaking its own flower spikes without me having to do anything. Just letting it be. And you can see the flower spikes, if I keep it like this, they're kind of aiming towards the same direction to the side, but I staked it a little too late to shape it. That's okay. So the number one reason I would say why staking is necessary is to support the weight of the blooms. It is a standard size Phalaenopsis that produces big flowers, which are very, very common in flower shops. I know when you purchase them, they might have 8 flowers, 10 flowers, and they might not be so cascadey. Well, the better you care for it and the more the orchid matures, you are more and more likely to have a lot of blooms that will just cascade and look beautiful, but be also very, very top heavy. And in the end, if you're not careful, and not only that, just if you leave the orchid do its thing, you can end up with broken flower spikes. And it happened to me so many times, it's not even funny. So that is the number one thing stakes prevent: breakage. Second thing, which arguably is worse, is preventing the entire orchid from getting damaged if it topples over. So another thing that can happen is the flower spikes will not break, they will remain intact, but the orchid will become so top heavy, you will find it on the floor one morning without you even realizing. Hence why this orchid is actually put in a terracotta pot, because she is so top heavy, even with the stakes. I don't trust it. I don't want to find it on the floor. No, we do not want to go through that. Staking it balances a little bit all of this weight distribution in a way where the orchid is not really heavy on one side. The flower spikes will always tend to lean. They will lean towards the light. If the light comes from whatever direction, you'll get this result where the flower spikes are kind of doing this business. But if your light source comes from one place, the window, you will get a wonderful display, but the orchid will be top heavy only on one side. So easy to see how it will just tumble over on the floor. The stakes distribute the weight a little bit better and make it a little bit more balanced. It's not always the case that it's going to be 100% balanced. I would suggest you also use a heavy pot if you have one, or if you suspect your orchid will topple over. But bottom line, that is the number 2 reason why we're using flower stakes. And of course, number 3, aesthetics. Because we're growing our orchids kind of upright, it looks better when the flower spikes tend to grow upwards and then do this wonderful arch, and they don't just grow horizontally, right? Well, with stakes we can actually train the flower spikes to have this beautiful upright and then archy display. I will not go into it because I do have a video which explains the process. I will link you to it down below if you're interested. But yeah, aesthetically speaking, in the way that we grow our orchids upright like this in homes, it is arguably a much more aesthetical display to have your orchid staked like that. Of course, this will be a personal choice, but in the end, the first 2 reasons, which have to do with the safety of the orchid, are really the most important ones. Aesthetics comes after, right? So that's what can happen if you don't stake your orchid. Hope you've enjoyed today's topic and you learned something new if you're new to orchids and you are wondering, should I keep those stakes the orchids come with? Yes, it's always a very good idea to keep those stakes. You never know when you're gonna use them. Maybe you will never use them, but sometimes when you need a stake, you will not find a long enough stake. Reason why? You can actually visit rePotme. And by the way, these stakes, rePotme sent them to me like many years ago, but I don't know if they still have them in stock. These hook stakes, they're awesome. Like rePotme, please bring them again. If you don't have these stakes, you can definitely find those bamboo stakes or wooden stakes, and you can attach the flower spike with these little clips, which of course you can find at rePotme.com. But yeah, in the end, if the stakes your orchids come with are in good condition, keep them because you never know if you're gonna use them. So with that said, thank you so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed hanging out with me today. Thank you rePotme for sponsoring yet another episode from our Orchid Care series. And with that said, I'll see you all next time. Bye!